And we're live with our 287th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. We've been off for a couple of weeks. This is specifically my own doing as I was out of town, but we're really excited to be back. We have Hayden with us today, Hayden Smith from Hunted Labs. We're going to get into his background and everything that he's done recently. There's been a lot of noise and a lot of discussion around attribution and context for supply chain packages. And that's why we're having him on today. We have discussed it in the past few episodes as well. Besides that, we do have a couple of opportunities that are coming up. Next week, we have our virtual practical secure code review training that is available. We still have a couple of seats available. If you are looking for an opportunity to upscale or reinvent your secure code review process, this is your opportunity to do that. It will be a virtual course. Ken and I have taught this for a number of years and are excited to bring it to the community at large. Would love to have you if you would like to join us. We also have DEF CON training that is available, our Harnessing LLMs for Application Security course, 2-day course at DEF CON trainings. That'll be after DEF CON. And we will post the links here shortly. So if you're looking to upscale your LLM usage and your ability to use LLMs for application security processes, this is your opportunity to do that. Besides that, Ken, anything else that you want to announce before we get into EasyJson and everything that Hayden's experienced over the last month?
Yeah, I was trying to think. I don't know that I do, actually. I think I'm just going to roll right into the episode this time.
Okay. I did want to give a shout out to Redpoint for sponsoring today really quickly before we talk with Hayden. Redpoint Security specializes in code security by coders, which is bolstered by years of experience testing applications and conducting code reviews against all types of applications. Redpoint also offers secure code training to help ground your team in better security practices across the development lifecycle. So check out redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. So thanks to Redpoint for sponsoring today. And with that, I do want to introduce Hayden Smith. Hayden, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a whirlwind. I'm really glad that, I don't even remember who it was that reached out that said that you would be available to come on.
It's nice, like, when I see a lot of conversation around EasyJson and like the stuff we're doing at large. It's like it's a huge conversation piece, and I think that's really why we wanted to go public with the report and put it out there. It's just like really to get the conversation going. And it seemed like we had been in kind of a lull for a little bit in the software supply chain space. And then this really got like some really heated debate on like both sides. And I love the arguments on both. So I'm happy to be here and like kind of explore every angle we can and kind of talk about how we explore every angle we can when we go through some of these like longer investigations.
Yeah. And it's very well done. I mean, I think I first saw it pop up through LinkedIn channels, but it was shared across multiple chat channels that both Ken and I are in. Like, it seemed to spread pretty quickly. Before we get into EasyJson, though, I did want to do our typical, what is your background, right? Like, how did you get into security? How did you like start with Hunted Labs? Like, what's gone on? What led you to this place in security?
Yeah, so I got my start actually working for Booz Allen Hamilton out in so I worked out here in LA out of the LA Air Force Base. So I was doing like I'm not gonna lie, it was some pretty boring cybersecurity work for the first year grad, so doing like very basic vulnerability assessments, writing them up for the government, all this stuff. But then kind of like as I cut my teeth there, I was actually under the wing of one of my co-founders. So the guy I started Hunted with, Tim Barone, he was coming over from FBI. So he was running red and blue team at FBI. So he kind of took me under his wing, as with like a lot of like, I feel like I meet a lot of security folks where they have a really, really strong mentor like early in their career that just kind of guides them and helps them learn. So he helped me do that. And I kind of went into more like cloud security architecture, security testing, while I was at Booz. And then I got sick of working in like basically buildings with no windows and stuff. So I was like, I'm done with this. And I was working on this like, it was like a prototype for the Air Force for like building a entirely like cloud native compute system for early missile warning detection systems. And I was doing all the security architecture, and I was using this open source tool. That's kind of how I got like my first real deep dive into open source, and it was called Anchore engine. So
Okay.
I was kind of tasked with like, hey, we need to lock down these containers, but we're too early on in this prototype to go and pay for anything. Go look for an open source tool that's free, that is also maintained in the US. So it's like, all right, gotcha. Container security maintained in the US. And that was like kind of the first time I was like, oh, now I have to go make sure like these guys are, here. The people who own and control the project are here in the United States. And then, you know, kind of started working with that tool hands on and putting it on like government systems. And then I was like, this tool is sweet. Like, and I had no idea like how they paid the bills, right? I was just like, I want to go work on, like, I love this thing. Like, I could see so many different applications for it. I need to get in contact. And I joined them when they were like around 10 people. So, kind of started there. And then right when I thought I was getting out of government work, Anchore was like, no, we got like this big deal going on with the Air Force. So you're going back to work, like stand up the container hardening pipeline and everything like that. This thing called DoD Platform One, which basically took a bunch of commercial off the shelf software, all delivered in the form of containers, runs them through a pipeline. They're taken as secure from that point. And then anywhere in the department can reuse them, right? So it's like really nice because in that ecosystem, it's a lot of like, if I get commercial off the shelf software, I have to go back, I have to secure it, I have to harden it, I have to remove some vulnerabilities or whatever. So worked there for a while, and then I took some time off. I worked at Anchore for probably 4 years, so got to see a lot of cool stuff. Got to be there when we split out Anchore engine and split it into Sift and Gripe. So that was like being there for those conversations, and then honestly going in, like going to bed, and you're like, man, we just like are gonna sunset engine, like, which we love, but it was more of like a server model deployment, and then going to like just a straight go binary lean, very efficient, like SBOM creation tool. We had we believed it was going to work, and it did. It's like now one of the most popular SBOM tools out there. But yeah, took some time off, and then during kind of my time at DoD, and even before that, as I was kind of saying, it was always like this thing that I think customers brought to me, which was like, hey, who maintains this project, right? And
Mhm.
it's always been kind of like it hasn't been like a hard requirement in those ecosystems, but they're always so curious. And even when we started Hunted, kind of like what we got down to was exploring this problem of who these people are that actually maintain a lot of this code. And I think the XZ thing was like a really big wake up call for a lot of people. And so I remember going through the XZ thing, and at the time we had like an internal tool, so we would use it for basically like one-off customer investigations or assessments and things like that. And then this is before we launched like our whole platform and everything, or which was built around the core of that tool. So I was like dealing with this customer, and they're like, "Hey, I want to know who owns all the open source, or who controls or influences all the open source that's in my application." And I remember getting that request which I thought was just outside of reality, right? And I was like, do you like, I remember going back and saying, like, do you know what you're asking for? Right. Which is like, we determine, okay, this is a pretty small application. And even for that, you're using over 3,800 like custom libraries. So
Yep.
yeah, that's kind of like making the long story longer, but that's kind of like my background and like
Okay.
where we like kind of why we started Hunted was just like focusing around, trying to find the bad guys in your software.
Yeah.
That's my 7-second kind of explainer. I used it at my son's career day talk I gave 2 weeks ago, and everyone was jazzed about it. Like this girl had light up shoes. She's like, does my shoe have software? And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't, is it connected to your mom's phone? Like it could, like
Yeah.
in this day and age. But yeah, that's kind of my background, how we got Hunted going, everything like that.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like there's been a big push over the last 5 years or so to gain, Ken, like we've talked about context for a while, right? Like the context of applications in general, what's going on with them. But a big part of that on the supply chain side is who's actually developing that software, right? It's not the first time that I've heard that discussion, especially within the government realms, right? Or the government universe, because they're very, very, very concerned about attribution, right? The context of who's actually building that software, what they could potentially do if they were to introduce a vulnerability into one of those dependency or a dependency of a dependency is a real concern. And from your side, right, looking at the developers that are actually doing that, I know we've got a good friend, Paul, that's in like the podcast Slack, 6 Mile, that does a lot of research into the package
Paul
repositories.
McCarty?
Yeah.
I met Paul through the XZ blog. So
yeah,
it was very interesting. And when I think about like communities, right? Like I think Paul is a great example of that. Like I met him randomly during the XZ thing, and he was at GitLab, I believe. Like when that happened, and he reached out and we kind of worked on that together. We also worked on, I think it was Solana, when that happened. And so we were like laughing because I was up here at like 6 p.m. or something, and we were trying to find the disclosure. Like, so we go to the repo and we're like, what the heck is going on? Like everything looks normal here. And then we like go like 3 releases back, and then in the release notes, it's like, hey, by the way, there was an attack on this repository. And we're like, oh, great. Like so obvious to spot here.
Yeah.
But Paul's great. I love Paul.
Great.
Like he's fantastic.
Yeah. And he's been doing a lot of work on the package repository side, right? He's pretty active. It seems like, it's more of the context of what's going on, what people are pushing into that. And then on the flip side, right, it's good to see Hunted Labs, another like organization that's more concentrated on attribution, as opposed to, hey, we just know people that are putting random crap into the package repositories.
Yeah.
What about the code itself? Who's actually developing it? Are there indicators of, what those developers do on a daily basis? Not only where they're located, but what else they contribute to, what else they've been involved when becomes very interesting, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I think like, when we dropped kind of the big EasyJson thing, I think the very first thing that we expected and we knew was coming, and we even like my own team makes fun of me, like so they like took my face and put it on a 1987 like Red Dawn poster, and they were like, look, that's you. And I was like laughing. But no, what's funny about that is like geo is like one indicator, right? So like we can't just like come out here and say anyone that's Russian, anyone that comes from, a traditional kind of hostile cyber nation states such as your Iran, China, North Korea, everything like that. If we're just going based on that and we're like, hey, anyone that's ever updated or README in GitHub, like we have to consider a threat, like we're done, right? Like that we have to cancel all of open source, it's done. So we can't just base it off of that, right? And so when we dive into like a lot of the indicators that we get into at Hunted, geo is a great one to flag, but it's not something to necessarily fail like a investigation over, right? So like if you're looking at geo, okay, what kind of tags do we have on this person? So we could have name, a place of work, what does that work entail? That's where we get into a lot of the things around the EasyJson bit and where we're going next with kind of like assessing the whole China positioning in this situation, which is honestly a lot more threatening, in my opinion. But looking at, okay, if they work at this organization and the project is stashed under Mail.ru, right? That's another big thing. Having again, been at Anchore when we had the whole SIP thing, when we had Anchore Engine, right? There's reasons why you stash it under your own org versus I'm Hayden, I'm going to put it in my personal repo. And so a big part of those big two things that come up there, that come up in the government's eyes all the time, is ownership and control, right? I want to have ownership and control. I will accept PRs. I will have open feature requests. I will definitely embrace every element of the open source community, right? But there's definitely some reasons behind the curtain, like why you don't just go full tilt, right? And so looking at things like that, looking at, is that organization sanctioned? Do they have ties to an individual that is sanctioned? And why is that, right? Like, is he sanctioned for smuggling in Cuban cigars, or is he sanctioned for offensive cyber action against the United States? So when we go into more of our open source intelligence gathering and social network analysis, that's where things start to get really, really, really interesting, right? Especially around EasyJson. Because you'll find people in that network, right? They have public facing DOJ indictments for offensive cyber action against the United States. So we're not coming, that's just all to say, right? We're not coming back here and we're saying anyone from Russia is bad, right? And we're not even saying that the EasyJson contributors are necessarily bad, right? But this network that exists and the organization that is attached to that name has been used in the past. And this is kind of why we reached out to Wired as well, because they have written extensively about all the censorship that org has done on behalf of Russian security services. So when you combine that all together, it becomes a little bit of a different picture than just, hey, these guys are from Russia, therefore they're bad.
Actually, can we pause on that just for a second?
Yeah.
And actually, can you explain that last? Because that seems like a non-trivial aspect of this to skip, or to not skip, but to blow past by. So they're not just Russian. There's actually day job indicators that these folks are okay.
So that organization that is that they work for, right? Like Mail.ru and VK have this, I'm pretty sure VK just inhaled Mail.ru, right? But those organizations, and I think this is linked in our full report, but there's a Wired article called How the Kremlin Infiltrated Russia's Facebook, right? And it goes to very deep lengths to explain how the cooperation works between Russian state security and that organization, right? Then when you start climbing the leadership chain of that organization, it just gets worse and worse and worse, right? So it's like, okay, so the CEO sanction, okay, who's he attached to? What does his, dad do, or whoever? And you start seeing more and more ties and more red flags. So it's like, okay, if this entity, has ties to the state, then that just needs to be taken into account for risk, right? And I'm not here to say hey, you guys have to stop using EasyJson, right? Like that wouldn't be something I would like stand on the hill and say. But what I'm saying is this is your risk picture right now, right? And what alternatives exist to pull you off of that, right? And I think a lot of the open source community is standing there and, not standing there, but taking action to try and solve that, right? Which is like, I know I was talking about there's an issue open right now around the open API spec, because that's where a lot of the big projects pull in open API spec to remove EasyJson, or to include EasyJson as kind of like a transitive dependency. So I think they're also like, taking in all the risk, making educated decisions around that. And that's really like, what we hope to do in this whole effort is to really encourage people to factor that into, if they want to use this piece of open source, and if they don't. And along with that, right, you could look at like OpenSSF scorecards. You could factor in like, do they do branch protection? Do they do SAST, fuzzing, all these things? But really just like step one, gaining a footprint, situational awareness for your teams around like who's out there, who controls the stuff that I rely on. Because that's really what matters, is like for a lot of teams that have, large open source footprints, you got to be able to like identify your critical ones where it's like, okay, this is the stuff I care about at work, right? And then it's like
Yeah.
maybe at home I have my side projects and I actually rely on this stuff, which is totally different. It's in a different language ecosystem, all that stuff. So I think that's the key step that we are trying to accomplish here in that report, is like just getting the word out to start like, hey, you need to start factoring this in. And then you could start doing like some really cool things around it, like, alerting when a new contributor gets added. Like, dang,
Mhm.
how cool would that have been? Like in the XZ case, like, hey, Jatan, okay, like, what's his background? Like, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Well, and it I wanted to highlight this point that you made about the threat to a specific organization or a specific individual based on the packages that are being pulled in or the code that's being used. It's going to be different. And we've always talked about this idea that threat models need to be done based on the organization and based on the current thinking and risk tolerance of an organization. So the
Oh yeah.
government has a very different risk tolerance than, you know, Facebook, right?
Right.
And then Facebook has a very different risk tolerance than GitHub or, a bank, right? An online
Yeah.
bank, a Bank of America. And they are going to either, they're just going to accept different attribution. They're going to accept different packages based on that risk profile. But if you don't know what that risk profile is, you're just basically open to everything.
Yeah.
But then it's also, we have to have the context. We have to have the knowledge of what's going into that software in order to actually make those calls. Part of that is the open source portion. Part of that is what Ken's doing over at Dry Run as far as like the pull requests as things are coming in,
Yeah.
and the code that's being written. Part of it is like your WAF and the protection that's going into the actual running application. Like there's so many pieces that have to be
Oh
pulled
yeah.
in. Any place that we're blind is where we start to have problems, and where we can be exposed, like XZ and like what you're seeing with EasyJson. It's not a simple problem.
Yeah, it's not. It's super complex. And then I think that whole part around, checking like PR's code, like, is the code good in and of itself, right? And like that is like a very hard thing for people, like different organizations, to kind of accept from a risk tolerance perspective. So this was like the entire problem with EasyJson, from like the match wasn't lit yet, right? So like it wasn't like the burning fire,
Mm-mm.
right? Like there was no like malware or crazy backdoor or something like that was the case with the XZ. but when we talk with some of the government, right? When we had our conversations with them around EasyJson, I remember when we went in and told them how prevalent this package was. It was during kind of like a demonstration, and they thought, "Oh, you like that? That's made up, right? Like that was all hypothetical."
Uh-huh.
I was like, "No, that is 100% real. This is a real world scenario we're dealing with here." And they were like, "What?" Like, and that changed on a dime, right? And it was like the reason that was what they were concerned, right? And we are also concerned where we go out and we support a lot of national security systems, right? So it doesn't always have to be this huge, like cataclysmic, huge
Mhm.
apocalyptic event, right? But for a lot of those systems, the reason they got there was a lot of action there was if that package runs like I think as advertised, they say it runs 30% faster than any kind of like JSON serializer out there. So what if it ran like 25%, right? It just took a slight downgrade, right? And then we inhale that into all of our systems, and now we're kind of not as performant as where that system once was. That's unacceptable for those kinds of mission sets, right?
Mhm.
Where it can't be as performant as now our adversaries system. So it's part of the context that you have to just take in from the risk perspective too. um, but yeah, I think there's a lot of levers to pull on here for sure. Like the maintainer part, the contributor part is huge. Checking to make sure the code is good, that's not going anywhere, right? Like that's what we need to keep doing that. And we're not here at Hunted to say, oh yeah, like you could just throw that to the wind. No, we're here to say like we need to like add more on top to this ice cream sundae. And
Mhm.
it's tough, right? Because like I empathize with like security teams because I was like once there. So like when you come in and you're like, hey, we got this problem, they're like, oh great, another thing. Right? And that's really really tough.
Mhm.
One of the
Yeah.
one of the things I want to really dial in here before because I have a follow up here, but one of the things I really wanted to dial in on was because you guys are talking about essentially the factors that we use to determine the risk of a package that is going to be included in some software. That's what it sounds like, right? So if that is true, then like we know that you've mentioned like the actor's day job, right? So or their affiliations. So affiliations that I guess you could really just say the actor themselves, right? As an
Yeah,
entity, just simplify it. So that's one. We talked about code. We talked about
yeah.
code. So like, and I'll give my own two examples there too, which are like with XZ utils, we had disabling of security tooling and obfuscated code. So those are kind of like two subcategories of like code risk, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
And then I was trying to, because hear me out on why I'm trying to figure this out because I was looking at OSSF scorecard, that tool that performs some. Actually, let me put this link in here that performs some checks, right? And I was looking at like what are their default checks around, because this is supposed
Yeah,
to be helping, right, with like giving you some scorecard for risk. And some of these
yeah,
things are really good, right? Like it's around not anything to do with contributors. It's around having a code review process in place, a SaaS tool running, a dependency tool running, things of that nature. But when it comes to human beings and those risk factors, the only thing it really seems to tie into is contributors. There's two contributors on the project.
yeah,
So in my head, I'm sitting here thinking, well, you know, whether it's an open source project, a commercial project, package managers or package distributors themselves, they all probably could use an API where they hone in on the risk
yeah,
factor of the contributor. So I don't know if there are other
yeah.
like factors we could consider as
I think
usable
Y-
for here.
yeah, I think like one we do have one that I think everyone, it goes back to that like one meme where it's like the guy in Nebraska maintaining everything, which like you just alluded to, right? Which is like what I call it the truck factor, which is if this person got hit by a truck, what's going to happen to the project, right? And that's the easiest way to explain it to people when we try and introduce this. Like, hey, you have these contributors out there that are literally by themselves, right? So they're maintaining this project by themselves with no assistance, unpaid, right? And then that's a huge area of like opportunity, I think, for industry to come in and like really augment that capability. So in my opinion, like the best way to help is not like kicking them a $5 Starbucks card. Like I think a lot of like just hands-on support is what's needed, right? Like bring me the fix, right? And so if we want something changed, bring it in a PR, right? I've always kind of thought that. But I think that factor is super important to consider. And I also think there's also this a lot of people said after the EasyJson thing, which was, okay, well, these guys had their names up there, they had where they worked. Like, yeah, those are our known knowns. Like, honestly,
Mhm.
that's getting lucky, right? But a lot of it comes down to like our unknown unknowns. So like Jatan is just the perfect example on this because dude came, I mean, homie came out of nowhere, right? And then he's like, oh yeah, how do I commit in this README to like, oh yeah, let me go disable this specific feature in OSS fuzz. So you see this deep escalation in like how good he is, and so it's like insane to look at. And then he's completely unknown. You don't know where he works, but you do have some metadata there. So like what you do have is like, and this is all very important when you're looking at the future, which is let's get some alerting set up. Let's do some continuous monitoring on critical repos that my organization needs to have up and running at all times, or else we're not shipping today, right? So getting like alerts built out around who is this like, okay, how old is this contributor account, right? Like, is this like a baby ghost account that's like,
Mhm.
uh, you know, being used to go commit code across 500 different repos and they're just hoping to get something like accepted? Like, that's a really good indicator. Like, having a baby or ghost account, it's very, very easy to track that and the GitHub metadata. And that's also a core indicator of like, of what like Jatan was, but he kind of stuck around for even a couple years and kind of like built his rapport. He did an excellent job, like, or they did an excellent job doing the social engineering behind that. But on those critical projects where it's like, hey, we have two maintainers, we all of a sudden just got a third or fourth. It's like, okay, well, who are the third and fourth people? And then you can ask questions like even to the people directly themselves, right? It's all about getting that awareness around that human factor as early as possible. And I think like the continuous monitoring bit is going to be like huge in helping like identify those styles of attacks early on.
I mean, I have my follow up just happens to really flow well off of what you just said, which is we just had oh, I'm gonna mess it up. Keaton, is that correct? On the podcast, is that correct?
Kyra?
Otanar,
Kyra.
Kyra Otanar. I'm sorry,
Kyra.
Kyra Otanar. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyways, we just had him on the podcast. I don't know if you've seen. It sounds like you know his name, so you're probably very familiar
Yeah.
with the TSA pre-check of developers argument. And I'll just say it. Like I think well, actually, you know what? No, I won't. Let me ask you, because I don't want to influence your response. Like, what do you think? Not do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that will assist here, like with reducing risk? Because you just mentioned that
Yeah.
like it's a very much a human thing.
I think,
And then there's the question of who are these add-on contributors that are
yeah.
now on the project.
Yeah. I think it's like a harmless kind of feature to introduce if you're like GitHub. If you want to verify, right? Like even LinkedIn has that. But if you don't, right, it shouldn't like penalize you, right? If you want to remain anonymous, like, and people want to continue to do stuff just like fully anonymous, that's fine too, right? Like, it is the internet after all. But we at Hunted, we're kind of working with the cards we're dealt, right? So we just work off the indicators we can grab, and work with the OSINT that we have to try and really give that good picture of risk, whether you're anonymous or not, right? And I think the verification, I I just don't see, like, if I was king for the day, would I love it? Yeah, it'd be really cool, like, to have extra steps of verification, whether it's through a government IDE or something like that. But I also know that, like, when we talk about like very advanced, persistent threat actors, like, they'll find a way to get verified. You know what I mean? So you got to still kind of intercept threats as they come in, right? So it's like, even though we could add verification, and it could work, right? We still have to put some like kind of monitoring, continuous protection in place to help with that. But I'm not like, it's such a hard problem, because I feel like anything that, like, the people that would have to do it would be like GitHub, and I feel like anything that interferes with the developer experience, and we talk about this all the time at Hunted, anything that will interfere with the kind of developer's experience at all, or add 2% more friction, it's off the table, because it's just it will threaten kind of, will they continue to use the platform or not.
Yeah,
So let
you would
me
see.
ask.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Seth.
No, I was just going to reiterate that, like, because that's what I go to as the development experience that I've had over time. And what you would see, you put a gate on there for an organization or for a developer, and they're going to flip from GitHub to GitLab, or they're going to
Yeah.
roll out their own version, or they're going to move back to Jenkins because that was easier to use, because I didn't have to step through all of this stuff. It's only when you control the full gate, like Apple, that you can enforce those sorts of verifications.
Yeah.
And then you see people that are like, fine, we're just not going to make it an iOS or a Mac OS app because of those gates that you put into place. So we have examples of that in the real world. And yeah, you're absolutely right, basically, is what I'm saying. Sorry, Ken, what was your question?
No, I'm following down this trend. I'm not, because bear with me here. I have a point to all this. So I want to hone back in. There's a few points here, but there's one I want to hone back in on, which is like, let me ask this question. If you're verified, right? So if I go and I get my pre-check verification, how would that be used would it be used to prevent vulnerabilities or like issues being, malicious actors basically? And if so, and if that's the intention, how would it be used, I guess?
Yeah, and that's like kind of the problem I see, right? Is like, if you're gonna set up like that goes into like the project maintenance itself, right? So it's like, okay, even if you verify, like, say your board of maintainers, that's like 9 people, like, is that saying like you're gonna stop accepting contributions from everyone unless you're verified? Like, that won't work in the community, and it's just that I think, honestly, it's interesting because, like, technically, verification scales. Culturally, it does not, right? And so I think that is like an interesting problem when we talk about kind of developer identity, developer verification, stuff like that. And that's like why at Hunted, we're so focused on like, hey, look, we're not telling you to like lift a finger. Like, we'll just take whatever we could get and work with what we got, right? And if that means we have to go through extra cycles or bring in data from somewhere else and create a new API call for it, like, that's what we're going to do then, right? Because we know we're not going to rely on the environment that we're operating in to like give us any favors, right? So that's like my whole theory, though. But getting back to your question, like, yeah, it just doesn't scale culturally, because no one's going to go out there and say, you can no longer contribute to my project unless you're verified,
Well, and I mean,
yeah,
I go back to the open source developer viewpoint where they slave away at something that is a passion project, and realistically no one else contributes. You look at
Yeah.
most of those open source projects, and it's one or two guys that basically run the project, that do everything on it. It's very rare that it's supported by a large organization. I mean, it goes back to that XKCD that I just posted,
Yeah.
right? The dependency, like everything depends on one small package, like LeftPad, for instance, right? And when that
Yeah.
developer decides they're done, the whole internet falls apart.
Yeah.
And so if we make it really hard for them to accept any sort of contribution from someone that is willing to step in, it like they're done. Like
Yeah.
our whole application is going to fall apart.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Yeah.
I think that's where like it's just that just makes it so obvious, right? Where it's like the main piece, the main tool that's being exploited in all of this is the trust, right? Between the maintainer and the contributors, right?
Mhm.
And I think that is like huge. And that example you just talked about, Seth, like illuminates that perfectly, right? Because it's like they know, right? Attackers know they're not going to turn down like, help, right? Like they'll review
Yeah.
PRs and do stuff over time, but like if you're persistent enough, you can really do some serious, like we've seen, you could do very, very deep damage by just
Well,
exploiting trust itself. And so you
yeah.
need to like, you can't put that on, like, that's why, I think communities have to like step up and like help, themselves, right? Where it's like, we need to come in, and this is like industry too. We need to come in and help illuminate these things. And that was like the whole thing with everything we just released, right? It's like, hey, we want to illuminate this just to put it on your radar, dude. That's it.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Well, and so there's that, and then there's also the targeting effort, right? Like,
Yeah.
so if I'm an attacker and I want a verified account that has access to some huge project like EasyJson, like I can go the route of being a developer over time, or guess what? There's only two guys that maintain it. How about I
Yeah.
just target those two guys and eventually try and take over one of their accounts?
Oh, yeah.
Because
And
they're out there in the world, and it's probably fairly easy
yeah.
to figure out who they are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's been like kind of our like analysis, like how we frame things, right? Is like we are acknowledging here at Hunted that these humans exist in a world where there are 5 billion different like butterfly effect moments going on all over the world, right? So it's like they exist in states, right? Where whether they agree with it or not, that political system could be leveraged to their disadvantage, right? So if you're going through from a targeting effort from an adversarial perspective and you're looking at, oh, wow, okay, I just came across this package and it's perfect. It's like what I need to do this, like for this mission or this attack or whatever. And you see that those guys are in your own backyard, right? You have a lot of levers you can pull on, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's like direct force and we're kicking down doors, like that's a Nginx F5 debacle that happened like some time ago, or it could be we're paying people, right? And it's like if you're like humans are susceptible to bribes too, so it's like maybe I don't even need to compromise their account, right? Maybe I just need to kick them an extra like 50 grand and like they'll do whatever I want, and I think that's like the most dynamic part of the situation, and that's why you need to like that's why
Yeah.
we're like telling people you really need to be like on your feet right now. Like you need to be paying attention, looking around, trying to get awareness of what you have, because we see this as kind of like the most contested space moving forward in the next 5 years. And I think it's like not just us, right? It's like, I know Paul, right, is super concerned about this as well. And his tooling and everything he does, his research, amazing, right? And I know chain guards even think of the same thing too, which was interesting because like chain guards started when we released the Wired article, like people could pull it up and it was like, I'm not sure, like, is this a big security issue? And that was their stance. And now, right, they're like, code is the next geopolitical attack surface, and like it's a national security, like open source is a national security issue. And I want to be clear, like, I'm not mad about that. Like, I like when people see that and then, have that stance, and people in the community have that stance. And then over time, kind of join our team. Right. And
Mhm.
so, and like take that perspective and can see how big of an issue this actually is. Right. Like the chasm was crossed when we started putting like open source software and Kubernetes on fighter jets. So, like, we can't, that horse has left the barn, so it's not coming back. So, like,
Yep.
that's why we have to kind of be on our front foot. And my position is, like, we need the biggest team that we can get, no matter what company you're kind of repping, or like if you're just the open source contributor. Because I think like from the outfall of the XZ thing, like one thing I noticed was like there's this whole like open source security community that came in to like track down Jatan in like 2 hours, like
Yeah.
every commit he ever made on GitHub, right? And we need more people like that. And so it doesn't matter kind of like where you come from, right? As long as like you identify with that mission and you're down to like, treat it with the seriousness that it deserves. Like I love working with people like that. So
Yeah. Realistically, we're all on the same team, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah, we may be competing in the marketplace for clients or whatever it is, but there is enough to go around for us all to eat, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And yeah, we've got to work together on it.
yeah, and that's like I'm always more, I don't know, maybe I'm like just very optimistic person, but I feel very positively that like software can solve this problem for us.
Yeah. Well, you say that, but I keep going back to we can always design a software or a technical solution, but when it's a human problem, there's
Yeah.
always going to be a weakness, right?
Yeah,
And that's
that's
it's maintaining that or containing the blast radius, I guess, is what you need to look at.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's like one reason we did call it blast radius like in our
Yeah.
report and everything, because it's like how far does this actually spread? And it was one thing that we talked about. uh I think I talked to Paul about this during the XZ thing, which was like, what is the blast radius of this entire event? And then like getting your arms around it like took so long, right? And so anything that we could do, from a hunted by providing our platform to come in and see like, hey, what is the blast radius? If this thing, like you could say, oh, it's a 20-year-old vulnerability that just popped, right? Like, so boom, here it is. Or you could say like, what if, right? So like, what if this piece of open source that I use across all my applications, what if this thing goes bad, right? And uh, you could see the blast radius of that event. You could see the blast radius of like if a attacker comes in or a threat actor that is tracked in your system because he's already contributing, what else could they take out in the process because they're also maybe maintainers for 3 or 4 other projects, stuff
Mhm.
like that. It's a dynamic problem for sure.
Yeah. Yep. It is a dynamic problem. And it's not one that organizations have solved by any
Oh
stretch
no.
at this point.
Yeah.
If anything, right, like me as a third party like AppSec consultant, most organizations I deal with struggle with just patch management in general.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of biting my tongue because I'm like, well, like, yeah, I know, like okay, definitely people could get involved in the sense that like you could take the top percentage of most popular libraries that are like underpinning. You could
Yeah.
categorize it down to like these are the ones that are most critical to review and have a community around that. But then it becomes cool. You've got the markers for risk there, but how do we take action? Because like to Seth's point, I deal with all day long, literally all day long, different people and different companies and their SDLC and the way that they do things. And the one thing that is very consistent across all of them is dependency management hell. Like they all are they aren't terrible at it. Their tools are all terrible at it, period, bar none. I haven't seen a tool on the
Yeah.
market today that solves that problem for people. It's still a very, very difficult one. And that's just off of like known CVs. That's not even, hey,
Yeah.
there's some risky stuff going on here. You should understand that like your apps would break tomorrow if this library that has risky stuff going on in it
Yeah.
was to be yanked, right? So from my perspective, it becomes a question of like, not just like the how. I figure, you're very keen on the heuristics of the things that show risk. You can certainly automate it. You've mentioned software automating it, which means you can expose an API that these different
Yeah.
places can use. And I feel like that's probably more the solution. But the question becomes, I assume everybody uses it. For me, my preference would be like, I definitely want package distributors to take this more seriously. Like, I feel like that's obviously where it starts, right? Somebody's got to distribute these packages to the world. But from there on, like, where else do you think that people, or have you ideated around some ways that people can, sort of, if there was API, like we'll say there's an API you can call or tools that you can use, right? Like, how
Yeah.
do they implement those?
Yeah, it's definitely more of like how do we push the data somewhere, right? So like a lot around the dependency management piece. So like a lot of people um have to some extent, right? It's not necessarily always great, but they do have some understanding of the dependencies that they have. And sometimes they're all pinned, sometimes they're not. Like in the regulated industry, a lot of them like have pinned versions. So they have like these crazy, crazy lists that haven't been updated in like, maybe like 6 months because they're still on all that stuff, right? And so pushing the data there and integrating it with that is super beneficial because then you get the married up version. And like if we could go in, and there's been a lot of debate in the last probably week around software bill of materials and how do you use those and like what are they good for, right?
Mhm.
Integrating those is actually a really nice look when you're looking at where does this sit in the context of my application. It does have that very nice kind of like intersection and marriage point there. But we have seen it where people are like, hey, I just want to kind of take like the raw threat intel and punt it to something else. And that could be something like I already talked about, which is like more of the software management side of the house. It could also be like cyber threat, right? So it could be
Sure,
like,
yeah.
hey, we're gonna go throw this into like CTI feeds and stuff like that. But I think another thing that you touched on that I'm very like interested in, and everyone at Hunted is looking at right now, is how these package managers are going to change because they are getting absolutely torched, right? Like
Yeah.
NPM is getting completely wrecked every single day. Versus like Go has a lot more like security protections built in with how they do publishing, right? Versus compare that to npm or Python, where you see a lot of PyPy like libraries recently, also like going down, which is an interesting ecosystem because that like PyPy's huge, empowering like a lot of the large language models and stuff like that. So
I mean, Golang does bother me with their pulling directly in from GitHub. I'll admit,
yeah,
but you're not wrong that the package managers themselves are getting beat up constantly. And that's where I'm always thinking like, how do those platforms, reduce risk meaningfully so that they're not spreading out, they're not spreading packages that are, and you're actually, and just want to say, like, point out too, I think that's so with the whole SBOM and then having a list of your most important libraries and that kind of being static. I will say, like, one thing that's true, and Seth, you should weigh in on this one because you also deal with a lot of different orgs where it does seem like there are a handful of apps that are like the business specific apps for pretty much every org universally. And then there's a lot of apps that kind of fall out that they're adjacent, they're necessary, but they're not the critical, like this powers the business. And for this powers the business style apps, I do not see very often new libraries being introduced. And there is like more sort of static list of existing pinned to a version libraries. But do you see that same thing, Seth? Like,
Oof.
yeah.
You're asking me for maturity metrics, and most of the organizations I deal with do not have that. I'll just be honest, right?
yeah,
I, they don't. They don't, right? Like they're lucky if they have half of an FTE dedicated to application security. They're lucky if they've got a couple of guys that actually even know how to spell DevSecOps as opposed to DevOps. And it's difficult when you're asking me this question and you're coming from organizations where you are dealing with a large security team, like a Microsoft, like a GitHub. Yeah, any team of any kind. When I look at an organization that has 200 developers, they have a CISO and a couple of security engineers, but they came from the network security, background. And that's what they're dealing with. So when they start talking about vulnerability management, they're talking about, hey, we scanned the network with Rapid7 and we're trying to reduce our network security vulnerability count over time. And I say SQL injection, and they're like, well, doesn't Rapid7 cover that, right? And so like, again, like this is the nihilistic, portion of Seth that's coming out, because I'm seeing over time dealing with these organizations that they would love to struggle with this sort of a question. And I want to give them the knowledge that we're talking about, but it's just one more thing on their feed that probably isn't going to get any attention until XE happens, right?
Yeah.
Until their management actually recognizes that there is a security threat that's there. And part of it is just being to escalate that, there's more that goes into it, but so yes and no. Yeah. Just,
Sorry that your experience is, no, but that is that's like, it is. I mean, I don't know. I think with consulting, you are bringing in because they don't have that expertise in house.
Yeah. And that's probably part of it. So, but on the flip side, right? Like things that we've started to do in trying to raise awareness, and Hayden, I'd be looking at 100 Labs for something like this, is being able to do code review and then give them attribution. Give them, hey, we scanned your site and we saw that it made calls to X, Y, and Z services. Did you know that these are being hosted by these other organizations, that this is what your footprint looks like?
Right.
The whole OSINT view of an application just isn't there right now. We do a lot of OSINT activities from a network perspective, but we don't from the app side of things.
Right.
And so being able to provide that view, and and we can take this offline. I know we're at about an hour now, right? Or we can continue the conversation, but I would be looking for the ability to take the information that you have and give it to clients that maybe aren't a GitHub, that aren't a Microsoft, or aren't like government organizations that have thousands of people working on these problems. So that we can raise that awareness on the smaller scale.
It is tough. And I think like it all comes down to just like a resources game of like big and small organizations. And we do work with small organizations all the time. I know I talked about like kind of our first customer that we had at Hunted, they weren't like a big, huge security shop. So you have to distill the information down in such a way and marry it with like CVE data, EPSS data, stuff that they're like used to seeing. So that way you have like that different telemetry to look at to make like an educated decision on, okay, do I need to burn down, like based on all these factors, did this kind of vulnerability or did this package jump up the stack, right? Like, should we actually tackle this right now? And I think that like when we do that, it drops it down like magnitudes when you start thinking about, okay, well, when we layer in all these factors, and I think like runtime is also like getting really hot right now. It seems to be like I was at RSA, and I think like every single billboard I saw was like some combination of AI and runtime security, but really cutting down like, okay, on the patch management side of the house, like that has a huge lever you could pull on and introduce as well. But really looking at, kind of the common things that people are used to using for vuln management, combining it with the human elements that we have today and distilling it down into like really easy, actionable data to give them like, real remediation, not just like, hey, I'm going to bump from package version 1.1 to 1.2 and now vulnerability is gone, right? That's not the same when you're talking about like something like an EasyJson. And this gets into like the difference between like software supply chain security and like building a resilient software supply chain. So a resilient one would just be, hey, I don't need to use this package anymore, so I'm going to go source an alternative package and make it work with my application, right? And that's kind of the difference there, and really like where we're trying to take the game is not just securing software supply chains, but like building resilient ones, right? Where you have really, really nice interoperability, and we can help you make them a bit more interoperable by having like, using, there's a great place for like LLMs to come in, right? Where it's like you can look at the application, look what the files that are being used, and look at like, okay, what do I do if I need to swap this thing out, right? At least give them a good starting point to work off of.
Yep. And that was, I highlighted that quote from Robert really quick that he dropped in there about how we, oh no, you're okay. I mean,
okay.
But you were speaking to it directly, right? Like, part of the issue that we have is we detect these things, but we don't give good remediation advice on how to actually solve them quickly. And I know like, it sounds like all of us are on board with that, because that's what we've seen in the development and security space over time, to Robert's point. But
I will caution though, I'm going to pile on to piling on, which is actually, maybe it's not piling on, maybe it's a contradiction. Here's what I'll say about remediation though. Trickier than you think. People are very, very, very picky about remediation advice, and there's a lot of there are a lot of different perspectives on what is quality remediation advice. So, and a way to tackle remediation in general. So, I mean, I don't disagree. I just know that that's a very hard problem to solve in mass. Very difficult.
Oh yeah. And then you span that across like the entire open source ecosystem. It's like, if you want like where some of these changes have to happen because they're that far upstream, Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's all like, this is all intelligent and it all makes sense. It's just also like realities of, the world we're operating into.
Yeah. Reality. What is it? Yeah. Anyway, so we are past the hour mark here. Hayden, we appreciate you coming on today. This conversation has been really, really interesting. We're going to have to do a follow-up at some point.
Yeah.
As Haunted Labs grows, I'd be interested to talk through like, other spaces that you get into and research that you do. Let us know, right? Like, because we'd be happy to highlight some of that. It all falls in the space, and there's a lot of interest within our community in general for these things, obviously, right?
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. This was absolutely awesome. I would love to come back. Right now we're doing a whole kind of investigation on kind of China's influence on the open source community, looking at ownership, control, and the influence of certain companies and individuals involved in that. So we have a full report that's kind of on deck, and looking specifically at geopolitical risk and how that's influencing, the open source community.
Awesome.
I would love that. Like, I would love a part 2 where we cover that report. So I guess we'll chat with Aaron to get that all set up. But
Yep. Exactly. Let us know as you're getting close to that release, because we'd love to feature it and talk through it.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get Paul on too. Have both folks on, and then I think it would be a very lively discussion. Maybe even schedule for a little bit longer than an hour, but we'll see if we can grab your time. I know you're busy and you run a company too.
No.
So
any time for Paul, I'll make time for sure. He's
Sweet.
Great. Yeah, okay. I love that guy. All right.
Yeah, we'll talk with Paul, but either way, appreciate you coming on today. Any final thoughts? Like, where could people actually reach out to you, find you to further the discussion?
So you could just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Really, that's like the probably best avenue. If you want to check out any of what we're doing over at Hunted, go ahead and go to huntedlabs.com. You'll get the threat report there.
Okay.
You'll get the full EasyJson blog, and then if you want to check out what we build and how we make this, actionable for users around the world, let us know.
Cool. Good deal.
Yeah.
Well, great. With that, we'll go ahead and close it out today. Thanks for the discussion. If you want to continue the discussion, reach out to Hayden directly or jump into Slack. There's been, some talk there as well. And otherwise we will see everyone, in the next week. So thanks for coming.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks all.